Welcome, everyone. Bienvenue à toutes et à tous. This webinar is going to be conducted in French and in English. Ce webinaire va se dérouler en français et en anglais. So please select your language of listening as indicated on the slide. Je vous invite à sélectionner votre langue d'écoute comme indiqué sur la présentation. I guess that now you should all be on the right interpretation channel. So let me introduce myself. I'm Claire Bréchard, Head of Research and International Relations at the French Institute for Civil Society Organizations, and I'll be chairing this webinar. It's a pleasure to have you with us today, and thank you for joining. I'd like to launch a very quick survey so we can all see who's attending the webinar. So there is a QR code on the screen. If you can scan it, or we'll also put a link in the chat box if you can't scan the QR code. But if you scan that QR code, you'll access a survey. I'll ask you to let us know on the first question where you're from. So just please type in the name of your country so we can see where our participants are from. And then once you've done that, you will see a second slide in which you can let us know of who you are. So you have a choice of options. So you can tell us if you're a researcher, a CSO practitioner, a partner of CSOs, or something else. So I see that France is quite well represented here, as is Germany, Belgium as well. There's quite a lot of answers coming in now, so I'll just wait a bit more. A few people from also England, Ireland, Slovakia, Colombia, Poland, Latvia, Sweden, Italy. Nice. So now maybe we can move on to the second slide to see who you are. So we have a majority of CSO practitioners, followed by others and partners of CSOs, which are actually about the same amount as researchers. Okay, good. Well, thank you very much for this. Well, it's nice to see that we have quite a bit of everything here: researchers, CSO actors, CSO stakeholders. So thank you very much for taking the time to answer this survey. Now let's begin by hearing Florian Covelli, who is the managing director of the institutes. He also has a few introductory words to open this webinar. Florian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Claire. Good afternoon to all of you. You are more than 370 to have registered for this webinar, and I think that it shows how important the topic we will be discussing over the next 3 hours is. What does citizens' collective engagement look like in Europe? How does this contribute to society and democracy? How can this even contribute to resist barbarism, as is the case in Ukraine? Are CSOs political and cultural European heritage? What can we learn from our common history? And how can this heritage be preserved through protected civil spaces, and perhaps tomorrow, thanks to a European legal regulations for CSOs? Finally, how can we encourage an environment that would be favorable to the development of CSOs? And what can we expect from public policies on this subject? We have brought together speakers from different backgrounds to address all these issues: CSOs leaders, researchers, public authorities, and philanthropic actors. And before I hand over to our panelists, I would like to tell you in a few words how we got there. we created the French Institute for Civil Society Organizations 4 years ago in order to foster a better knowledge and a better recognition of CSOs and their contribution to society. Our goal is also to foster CSOs' capacity building and to strengthen their relations with their partners. To achieve this ambition, we have developed 3 areas of expertise. The first one consists in detecting CSOs' knowledge needs. That is to say, what questions do we want to ask to academia? The second one is to design research support programs in response to those needs. And the third one is to disseminate research findings to the largest public so that the knowledge can be transformed into strategic visions, into perspective, or into stronger skills. When we first started the Institute, we launched a national consultation and asked French CSOs about their knowledge needs. Europe immediately appeared as an important topic. For this reason, we decided to launch a working group with 40 researchers and practitioners from CSOs coming from 16 different countries. We wanted to position our work in a European perspective, and that's why we worked in partnership with the Mecenata Institute based in Berlin. I greet Rupert Graf-Starwitz and Cyril Hummel, with the Institute for Social Research based in Oslo, and I greet Bernard Engelras, and also with Le Mouvement Associatif here in France, and I greet Claire Toury. We have obtained Erasmus Plus funding, as well as funding from the French Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs, and we thank them as well. Our working group has met 3 times in 8 months and was guided by 3 questions. What are the blind spots in the knowledge about CSOs in Europe? And we have drawn up a very complete list. What are the priority needs to be addressed by research in the coming years? And then how can knowledge at the European level be strengthened to meet those different needs? I started my speech with some remarks about the major democratic and societal challenges. And you understand now that the lever we want to activate to cope with those challenges is the lever of research and knowledge. Our working group produced 2 outputs: a white paper on knowledge needs, which sets priority research axes for the future, as well as recommendations for a knowledge program on CSOs and democracy in Europe, and an online collaborative library in English, in which we have started referencing scientific publication. These are the results that we would first like to share with you. And after that, we will host a roundtable discussion with experts on CSOs to discuss those key topics. Anne-Charlotte Dommartin from the French Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs will then give a closing speech. So here we are. I wish you a useful and enlightening webinar. And right now, we are all very much looking forward to hearing Oleksandra Matviichuk. Oleksandra, dear Mrs. President, thank you so much for being with us. On behalf of the organizers, our partners, and all participants, I would like to tell you our admiration for the actions you are carrying out and which have been awarded with a Nobel Peace Prize. And I would also like to send a message of support for your fight for freedom, solidarity, and democracy in Ukraine. We know that it's a fight for life and also for the universal values that we share. Thank you, Oleksandra.
Thank you. Thank you, Florian, for this introduction. Sorry, Oleksandra. Sorry.
I just want to say that it's a huge honor for me to be invited to this webinar, and I'm very grateful to organizers to provide such opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you very much to you, Oleksandra. I'm also honored to welcome you to this webinar. So, Oleksandra, you are a human rights lawyer and the head of the Center for Civil Liberties. We invited you to represent the CCL in our working group in February 2022 because of your continuous efforts to document the Ukrainian civil society as well as the infringements on its liberties. The Center for Civil Liberties was established in 2007 in Kyiv by democracy and human rights activists to promote human rights values. More generally, the organization works to foster civil society and to further the rule of law in pursuit of a full-fledged democracy in Ukraine. The CCL has been actively working for the protection of human rights in Ukraine and in the OSCE region for 15 years now, and it became the first human rights organization in the world. With your team, you have led several projects over the years, and from 2014 onwards, the center has been documenting war crimes committed by Russia and by Russian-backed forces against Ukraine. In November 2022, the CCL was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, and in the words of the Norwegian Nobel Committee, the CCL demonstrates the significance of civil society for peace and democracy. Again, it's a great honor to have you with us today, Oleksandra, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation. My first question to you is, how are you and how is the Ukrainian civil society?
It's very difficult to describe the experience of being and working in large-scale war. I'm a human rights lawyer, and I have been applying the law to defend people and human dignity for many years. And now I found myself in the circumstances when the law doesn't work. And when Russian troops deliberate shelling residential buildings, schools, churches, hospitals, attack evacuation corridors, manage filtration camps system, organize forcible deportations, commit murders, tortures, rapes, abductions, and other kinds of offenses against civilians, and the entire UN system couldn't stop such Russian atrocities. So it's a very difficult period from the professional point of view, because we faced with unprecedented number of war crimes, and from the personal point of view, because even with all my knowledge and skills, I wasn't prepared for such level of atrocities. But there is also a good sign, if I may say so, in this situation, is a huge wave of solidarity among Ukrainian civil society. First, I must admit that Ukrainian civil society expanded. There are a lot of people who become active after large-scale invasion started in different fields, try to contribute to general resistance. And I see how this dramatic period provoke us to reveal the best in us, to be courageous, to fight for freedom, to make the difficult but right choices, and to help each other. And now it's a time when people in Ukraine are constantly aware what does it mean to be a human being.
Thank you, Oleksandra. For sure, nobody can be prepared to what has been happening in Ukraine. One of the key topics that came out of our working group, as we'll see later, is how CSOs have contributed to shaping society across history and how it contributes to safeguarding democracy. You've started answering while giving bits of answers to the question I'm about to ask, but if you don't mind going into more details, how has civil society been responding to the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, and how do you think that the current mobilization will have long-lasting impacts on the Ukrainian civil society?
I would like to answer this question of the role which civil society in Ukraine play for current moment with reminder of the roots of this war. This war started not in February 2022, but in February 2014, when Ukraine obtained a chance for the quick democratic transformation after the collapse of the authoritarian regime due to Revolution of Dignity. And in order to stop us on this way, Putin started this war of aggression, occupied Crimea and part of Lugansk and Donetsk region, and last year expanded this war to the last-scale invasion. And that is why victory for Ukraine is not just to repel Russian troops out from the country. Victory for Ukraine is to succeed in democratic transformation of our country and to build a sustainable democratic institution. We have to fulfill these two tasks during all 8 years before large-scale invasion, and even now in ongoing large-scale war, we have no luxury to concentrate only on resistance, but we have to pay enormous effort to move forward on the way of democratization, especially taking to the account that last year we obtained the status of country candidacy to EU. And it's very difficult to provide democratic reform during peaceful time, but it's become extremely difficult to provide democratic reform during the war, because during the war there is also always a temptation to become a mirror of the other side. And the role of civil society is to keep this frame of democracy, rule of law, and human rights, and to remind ourselves and our own society that we are fighting in this war not just for territories, but for our freedom and for our democratic choice. And win war with Russia and transfer to Russia itself, there is no sense.
Thank you. You did talk about democracy. Indeed, the end goal here is to of course achieve a democratic state. And my question is, in a more universal perspective, what role does civil society play or should play in democracy? In the context of rising populism in several European countries, can CSOs contribute to restore democratic participation and trust?
I always tell that problem of current time is not in that fact that authoritarian regimes become strengthening, and in many countries this freedom is shrinking to the space, to the size of the prison cell. But the problem is that even in well-developed democracies, generations become put into the doubt the universal principle of Declaration of Human Rights, and the political movement which put this principle into doubt become more and more stronger. And this is natural process, because a lot of people in well-developed democracies, they inherited the rule of law, democracy, and human rights, and they're not fight for these values. And that is why they don't understand the real meaning. And then we see during election how people in well-developed democracies more easily exchange these values for others, like for economical benefits, for some illusion of safety, or even more for their own comfort. And the role of civil society in well-developed countries is to remind people and that freedom and human rights can't be taken for granted. We every day make a choice between authoritarianism and democracy. The future is not guaranteed, and our current position define our future.
Thank you. In order for CSOs to be able to take an active part in democracy, they need to be seen as legitimate actors by citizens as well as by the state. How, in your opinion, can they be seen as such, as legitimate actors, both by citizens and by the state?
I do believe that we have to pay a lot of efforts to find different ways how to involve ordinary people into civil society work. We have to create easy entry point for people who want to do something for their community, for their town, for their country, on different levels. And this is an urgent task, because when we concentrated to work only with cooperating with civil society actors without involving ordinary people, the general society, we increase the gap between civil society and people in the country. And this will lead to dramatic results. I can remind the example of my Polish colleagues who told me that they was aware that human rights values distributed very widely among people in Poland. But then they understood that when values distributed widely, it doesn't mean that these values distributed deeply. And now for these last years, they completely changed their activities and they start to go to the smallest villages and towns in different parts of Poland to speak directly with people. And they start to think how to organize campaigns and projects with the involving ordinary people into human rights work. And I think that in the face of the current challenges which we face as a human being in the world, we have always pay attention how to cut this gap between civil society and general people.
Thank you, Oleksandra. My final question to you, because it's really the topic of our webinar today, is how can knowledge on CSOs contribute to a better awareness and recognition of their contribution to society and democracy? In other words, how can knowledge on CSO be a lever to foster CSO capacity building and resilience?
I believe in people. And when we speak about civil society, we always speak about power of ordinary people. I always say that everything which my team achieved for this 16 years of our work, it's because ordinary people supported our work. The bright example is Revolution of Dignity, when I coordinated civil initiative Euromaidan SOS, and we brought up several thousands of people throughout the country to provide legal and other aid to persecuted protesters. And this fact that during 3 months, we work 24 hours a day to provide assistance to people who were beaten, who were tortured, who were arrested, who were accused in fabricated criminal and administrative charge. And we managed to proceed more than 16,000 requests for help. It's only because ordinary people join to our work and stand with us on this dramatic time of Ukrainian history. And the example of last year, it's also the bright example of power of people, because when large-scale invasion started, not only Putin, but even our partners, well-developed democracies, thought that Ukraine will not able to resist because Russia is enormous opposing power. Russia was the 11th economy in the world. Russia has a very strong military potential, and Russia has a much larger population. But the example of Ukraine convincingly proves when ordinary people stand up and strengthen the state institutions, when ordinary people start to fight for their freedom and for human dignity and for democratic choice of our country, we become stronger than even the second army in the world. So I believe that ordinary people have a much more great impact than they can even imagine. And that is why we can't think and can't predict a sustainable state development without civil society mobilization.
Thank you very much, Oleksandra, for those very insightful reflections on the state of civil society and its many contributions to safeguarding democracy. We're very aware that in Kiev and across Ukraine, conditions have been really difficult. When we prepared this webinar, Kyiv had just been bombed, but the CCL has been continuing its work ever since the beginning of the war of aggression against Ukraine. And we know how important your work has been, and we can only imagine the conditions in which you've had to do it. So we'd really like to express our solidarity and our deepest sympathy to the CCL and to the people of Ukraine. Thank you very much, Oleksandra, for your time. It was a great honor to have you open this webinar. I'd like to continue with Dr. Siri Umel, who is going to present the white paper, which is entitled "For a Better Knowledge of Civil Society Organizations in Europe, a white paper to guide future research in response to CSOs' knowledge needs." So we'll be taking questions at the end of Siri's intervention, so you can use the Q&A button to send your questions forward. Siri, you are a deputy director of the Mecenata Institute for Philanthropy and Civil Society, and you're a political and communication scientist. Your research focuses on democracy and civil society, as well as equality in civil society and in foundation research. In addition, you're a lecturer in the nonprofit management and public governance course at the University of Economics and Law. The Mecenata Foundation has been part of this project from the very beginning, as the foundation was in the steering committee of our working group, and we're very happy to have been working with you on that. Siri, can you present to us this white book that you wrote? What are the key priority knowledge needs that are presented in this white paper? And just before you start, I think you have some slides that you'd like to present. So just please take the time you need to share your slide before you start presenting the white paper.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. I'm going to share my...
If you can just, yeah.
So now you should be able to see everything.
Perfect.
Perfect. Just give me another second. No. I'm sorry. Just have to split the desktop so that I can see my notes.
No worries. Take your time.
Do you see the presentation now in the presentation mode?
No, not in the presentation mode. We see your PowerPoint mode. Yep, that's it. That's it there. It's the presentation mode.
But I can't still see my notes. It worked when we tried to when we tried it. It worked, but maybe the technique can help. I want to see my notes on the words, but also share the screen with you.
I guess we can still read what's written on your slides. So you can just go ahead like that. It's fine. It's big enough. We can see it. Otherwise, you'd have to, I think, stop sharing your screen and start like open the presentation mode and then only share the presentation.
You have my slides, right? I sent it to you. Can you share the screen?
Yep. Yeah, we will.
I think that's better. And
yeah, we will share them for you.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's just 3 slides, so you don't have to you don't have much work with it.
Okay.
Are we fine? Perfect.
Yep,
thank you so much for your help, and thank you very much for the nice introduction. I'm really happy to present you the outcome of the working groups Florian told you about, that we put in this white paper. In the working group, it soon became very obvious that civil society research is confronted with several problems that we have to overcome in order to get a better acknowledgement of civil society organizations, which is actually the aim of this project. So first, there is this problem of definition. Civil society organizations or civil societies is one of those terms that can be described as highly essential contested concept, which means it's an abstract idea that has been interpreted very differently depending on the point of view or the political value of that person that is interpreting it. So, and we see there are a lot of different expectations in that term about the thinking of what civil society organizations should contain or do for society. So there are many terms describing the social phenomenon of civil society initiative. There are the so-called third sector, the non-profit sector. We speaking about non-government organization like NGOs. We also talk about non-profit organizations. And since civil society is relying highly on gifts as empathy, time, or donations, terms like volunteering or philanthropy, for example, are very important and strongly interconnected with the concept too. But those terms are also not easy to define. The same applies to civil protest, for example, or activism. And these differences in regard of definition leads to another problem, which is the data collection. And the civil society sector is still not seen as a genuine social area by politics or the general public. And hence there is no systematically taken into account, which often prevents its place in the official statistical surveys in many countries. So while there are some components and aspects of civil society which are monitored, for example, volunteering or the number of sport associations, for example, there's a holistic approach that is missing, especially for Europe. And this brings us to the problem of the comparability of data as well. The existing empirical research often cannot be compared systematically due to different research designs, which lead to different results, sometimes really considerably different results. We can see this, for example, when it comes to the number of donations in Germany or the volunteering rates. And these were the problems. Coming from these problems, we asked in the working groups what they would consider to be like the main knowledge gaps of the civil society organization research, which I want to show you now. So the first section we found to be important is that of history of civil society organization and engagement in Europe. So, and why is that important, or why is there not enough research? To put it rather simple, if you look into history, we can explain why things are the way they are today. So a history of idea of the different definitions and concepts of civil society organization and engagement in Europe could set the ground for a really comparative qualification system and for an analytic framework to understand the current evolutions of civil society today. It could be asked how geographically, but also, for example, how ideology or historical condition of identity have produced the diversity in the sector we do know today. And looking at the history of civil society organization and engagement in Europe, it is possible to point out the fundamental contribution to society made by those in terms of social needs, for example, or by asking how civil society organizations have shaped economy or the state, or how they have shaped the general zeitgeist. So you can see already we do have like some cluster or pattern of civil society organization. If you compare them in Europe, you can see like the northern parts, you can compare them with those of the Eastern ex-Soviet countries or the countries in the South. But those studies are really rare, and mostly they consider just one or two aspects, for example, like social service, for example, which does not grasp the capacity of civil society in whole. So in order to create a European civil society, it is key to understand the various traditions. And a comparative approach should look into the differences as well as in the commonalities that we do have. Secondly, we put out the need of more knowledge about the characteristic of European civil society organizations and about an overview, a political, legal, and statistical overview. As I've mentioned before, civil society organizations often are not embedded in the official statistical survey system in many countries. So for pan-European perspective, we do not know how is the sector size, the diversity, the impact, how is the well-being statistically recorded. So it could be useful to create a statistic overview over all the national statistical surveys and research studies to identify and merge comparable data between the existing studies. Further research project could investigate the question on how civil society engagement is measured in the countries of Europe, and how the statistical method can be standardized for the sake of a better comparability. It's also important to find out which data are not yet collected and what influence this does have on the already existing research projects. In most European countries, the legal framework for civil society organizations is specified by the tax law. But we have very few separate summarized law or regulations existing for civil society organizations. So what we do missing is a comparative overview about what are the characteristics of legislation that promotes civil society, and if this legislation is transferable to other countries, taking into account that European countries are characterized by a special feature, namely they are characterized by the general legislation of the European Union as well as their own national legislation. So if we look for the Eastern European countries, for example, we see a rather short tradition of legal civil society that have tended to create an all-in framework, often following like an US American model. And in Western Europe countries, we see more that the development of framework were growing over 100 years and have, because of this, produced a very organic but often contradictory, very complex relations, which can be really difficult to apply. So this has to be considered and taken into account. Besides the legal and statistical overview and impact, another very important issue came up, and that's the CSO contribution to democracy and social cohesion. Many see the important role of civil society to promote participation and inclusion. Civil society organizations can help to ensure that marginalized communities, such as women, minorities, or the poor, are included in the democratic process. They can provide a platform for these communities to voice their interests. So by promoting participation and inclusion, civil society can help to strengthen the democracy and ensure that all citizens have a say in how they are governed. Thinkers like Alexis de Tocqueville or Robert Putnam stress also the contribution of civil society's organization for social cohesion in a society. Civil society can help to foster social cohesion and to promote a culture of democracy by bringing people together around a common issue and some shared values. And so they can help to build up trust and understanding between different social groups and individuals. This can help to prevent social conflict and promote a sense of shared citizenship, which is highly essential for a functioning democracy. But to be honest, for the empirical point of view, we actually do not have so much knowledge about this correlation. If clubs really building up trust, and if this trust can like pull up to the whole society, for example. And we do not know enough about how the way civil society organizations help influence and transform society. Because civil society have many functions. They can deliver social services, for example, advocacy, a watchdog function, and political participation, but also providing just self-help. And so this function can partly conflict. And how can this tension between that comes from with civil society organizations do a role as economic provider on the one hand and the contribution to democracy on the other be analyzed. And another serious and current question is the role of non-democratic civil society organizations. So more research should be done about the so-called uncivil society and the question of whether certain civil society organizations in Europe are obstacles to democracy, building like a formal base for far-right movements, for example. Also, there's still a big knowledge gap about the effects on civil society in national and European policymaking. So neither is there sufficient mapping of policy supporting civil society organization and engagement in Europe, which could set like institutional best practices in favor of civil society organization, for instance, nor do we have a consistent screening of positive support devices in Europe law that haven't described into national law yet. These measurements would help to evaluate the status quo. Additionally, prospective analysis that could shed light on the effect and impact of the current European policies on civil society organization over, let's say, the next 10 or 20 years. So to sum up, those were the main section of knowledge gap we discovered. You see, there are much more questions than answers. But we will not leave you there. We have set up some recommendations as well that will be presented by Florian later. I'm really happy now to officially launch the book, the white paper now. You will see it in the chat. You can see the link. I'm happy to invite you to have a look into the white paper. You see, it's fresh from the press, although I think it's just online. And you will find the link, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Siri, for writing this white paper and for presenting the main knowledge needs that are listed in this white paper. It was important to us that the white paper conveyed the conclusions of our working group, while also being useful to CSOs, to CSO stakeholders, and to researchers who did not take part in our work and in our working group. And I think you did a great work of contextualization and synthesis in your presentation and in the white paper. So yeah, I encourage you all to go and have a look at it it's in the chat box, so you can go and download it. We'll soon be taking questions from the public, so please keep sending them through via the Q&A button. But before moving to questions, we wanted to have a sense of how you feel regarding those key knowledge gaps. So there's a survey here on the screen, that a QR code to a survey on the screen. So please do scan it and let us know which are your priority knowledge needs. So they're all listed when you go on the survey. They're all listed for knowledge clusters that Siri has presented. So what we ask you to do is to order them by your according to your own priorities. So first the most important, and fourth the least important to you. And I'll see if we are starting to get answers. I think the link to the survey is also in the chat box, if you for those who didn't have time to scan the QR code, or it will be in the chat box in a minute. But we can see that the main results here. I don't know if Siri, you want to comment actually on the results.
It's very exciting. It's just like a race,
and it's changing.
So let's wait for
yeah,
the result.
It's actually quite tight.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can still wait a bit because it's still moving around. And we're getting more contributions. Okay, I think we have a trend here, don't we, Siri?
I think so. It was my guess actually, right? when we met.
It was. Yeah.
Yeah, but actually it's so obvious that these questions, that how civil society can contribute to democracy, is on the table right now, because we see like democracy is so much under stress, also in the European Union. So that doesn't surprise me. And I think it's actually one of the main fields of research that should be done.
Well, thank you, Siri, and thank you to everyone who took part in this survey. So now let's move on to the public and see if we have some questions. So yes, a first question is about the issue of statutes and regulations. Siri, the question is, are association statutes and regulations the same across the EU countries? It's a question that's coming from France. So in France, we have the 1901 law that is the basis the legal basis to set up an association, and associations fall under this law when they are declared. Is it the same across the EU?
No, it's not. I mean, there's no whole European legislation for all European countries, which is a problem. And it's a fact we have to look at the national level all the time, which makes it really hard to build up a European civil society on the one hand, but also to exchange data, for example, or to find some comparable outcomes.
Yes, indeed, there is no really uniform status regarding associations at the European level. So it's kind of like a national. Each country has its own regulation,
and it should be both. You know, we need some research about actually the to compare the legislation and the status quo and to see where we are, you know, now and what and how we differ, and then we have to come into movement or actually to build up a stable framework of legislation. But this is not the researchers' problem anymore, because this is a task for politicians, and they, of course, there are this discussion about should we have an association, EU association. So the discussion is there, but still it's not there yet.
No, it's not there yet, and we'll talk about it in more details with Sergey Lagodinsky, MEP, who is the initiator of that law, or to become law. Yeah. Okay, the second question is concerns volunteering. Is volunteering within CSOs organized the same ways across Europe?
I'm not sure if I grabbed the question right.
I'm not sure either. It's I don't know if it's is volunteering organized the same way across Europe, or is it? I think it's related to volunteering with CSOs. You know.
I mean, you find volunteering in every country, of course. You know, volunteering is like a global phenomenon, or just a normal social behavior. The problem I was referring to was more about that we are not able to grasp the numbers because the research designs vary, and also the way how nations count their volunteers are varying. So, but I don't know. I mean, if you look to Germany, for example, you see that, of course, there are some strategies to how to get people into volunteering. There are these Freiwilligenagenturen, which I don't know the translation, agencies for volunteering. And I think we find similar structures in different countries. I don't know if this answers the question you had.
Yeah, well, I guess it does. We have another question on sorry, I'm translating as I read it, so I'm looking for my words, regarding democracy and the role of civil society organizations towards society. I think this question relates to what we called uncivil society in our working group. And the question is about the infusion of undemocratic ideas within society through civil society organizations and also political parties, which is a bit different, I must say, but the question also addressed that. So what is how large is this phenomenon that we can observe in the United States, but also in Europe? And that, of course, relates to the rise of the far-right movements.
Yeah, the answer is we don't know how strong this or how big this phenomenon is, because we don't, starting with the problem that we have like a kind of a picture from civil society that is really have a normative implication, meaning that it's the good people that are meeting up in civil society and doing pro-democratic things. And now we see within the last decade that it's not the case. I mean, you have a lot of organizations that have the legal form of a civil society organization, being an association, for example, or a foundation under shareable law, but what they do, they actually are being to be undemocratic. So the research has problems to grasp this, coming from this normative perspective, so this is the first problem, and the second is that we do not know how to measure those movements. There's a study I know about done by the Corrective. They followed the money, and they build up an estimation about how much money goes into the anti-feminist movement of the global one. So these are data we have to use. But what they didn't do, they didn't differ between civil society organization and other organizations like companies, for example. So that's hard. That makes it hard for us to actually come to a result how much civil society, legally form of civil society is in there. But yeah, I think this is a very important field of research we have to do right now.
Yes, for sure. Thank you, Siri. Looking for other questions. There is one here. Is the idea that as a community of sorts, we could start coming together to develop research on some of the issues that have been raised for this group that we have here? Yeah, I don't want to answer for you, but
please do.
Yes, that's for sure the aim. And we'll address that later on. Actually, Florian will share the recommendations of the working group, and that is one of them. So yes. Maybe another question I have here for you, Siri. It's related to religion and the organization of solidarity through religious organizations. So do we have an idea of the interplay, the relationship between associations, CSOs, and religious institutions in organizing solidarity, mainly to tackle poverty or housing crisis?
I think it's important to say that we consider, I mean, with me, I mean the Mäzenata, and I guess many maybe can follow us here. We consider the religious community to be civil society. So there's no such thing as just the church and civil society, and they both can contribute. But if you see the very strong interconnection, for example, between the welfare umbrella organizations, the Caritas, which come from the big religious community, like Caritas, Diaconie, there is like a very strong interconnection. And that's, I mean, this goes a little bit back to the question I gave you in the panel. So how can we actually analyze how much contribute, how big is the contribution for transferring or for the stability of society? This exactly the question. We're not sure about this, so we have to dig in deeper and do more research about that.
Yes, for sure. Another question, just it's not really a question, I think it's more of a comment. that came regarding statistics. It says that if that person feels that there is quite a diversity of official statistic approaches in France and associations regarding economic weight, social provision weights, volunteering, engagement, employment weight, with special attention on certain sectors like sports, for instance, and that not many countries are so extensively covered by official statistics. We probably don't need a yearly survey approach, but each 5 years would definitely make sense. I don't know if you have a reaction to this comment.
I mean, I do agree. I mean, it's good that that you have this number in France. I'm just thinking about how this is in Germany. We do have numbers about the volunteering engagement, and but I think the employee weight is rather it's just an they just estimated, but I'm not sure. So I think this should be the basic for every country to at least have this data, you know.
Yeah, for sure. I think we have time for just one more question. And I'm looking here to see if something else came up. We have something regarding inclusion and diversity. Yeah, I guess I would. The question isn't very detailed, but what I'm guessing is that this question tackles the issue of diversity among CSOs regarding you know, gender equality, which is a big source of inequality. Is there something in this line? Are there priorities in terms of democratic challenges at the European level?
I mean, what we do know is that there is a lot of inequality in civil society organizations. But we just did this for Germany. We wrote a report about the possibility to create a more diversity setup, and we tried to find data about gender. Well, gender is actually there are some data about gender. It's much more complicated if you go to migration issues, for example, or age, for example, or other dimensions of diversity. But this is, again, this is just a national perspective, and we do not have the European comparable approach, which definitely would make sense to have. But my impression is right now on the national level, they try to find a picture about the status quo of diversity, but haven't reached the European level yet.
Okay, so yeah, we need to study to see if CSOs are on the same line across countries on those questions. Then it's something that still needs to be done.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Thierry. We've reached the end of the time we had for our discussion. Well, thank you very much for this. And I'm now pleased to welcome Dr. Bernard Enjolras, who will present to us the collaborative digital library that he has set up right after we held the last session of our working group. So Bernard, you are a research professor and director of the Center for Research on Civil Society and Voluntary Sector at the Norwegian Institute for Social Research. Your research is centered on civil society in a broad sense. That includes topics such as volunteering, voluntary organizations, governance, social capital and trust, civic engagement, and the digitalization of the public sphere, as well as social media and freedom of expression. You have, among other things, coordinated the European Third Sector Impact Research Projects. You're a member of our scientific committee, and you are also part of our working group steering committee. It's also been a pleasure to have been working with you and the ISR on this project. So you've worked on an online collaborative library, which has referenced 650 scientific publications. We'll put the link in the library in the chat box at the end of Bernard's intervention, so that you can go and have a look at the library after Bernard has presented it. So Bernard, can you tell us about this online library? What analysis did you draw on the state of the art regarding CSOs in Europe? Which are the areas where knowledge is prolific, and where are the knowledge gaps? I think you have a few slides as well that you might want to share with us. And
yes,
the slides are very interesting, so please do share them.
Thank you for the introduction. So I try to share my slides. Let's see the way it works.
Yeah, it works. If you want, you can put them on like full screen, so we can have a better.
So I have many things to organize. Okay.
Yep, that's perfect.
That's another problem. Yeah. Okay, so you are seeing it.
It was full screen, and now it's not. So I think you've.
Yeah, but
you
I have a same issue than Siri, because if I
your notes,
put it,
yes.
My notes are disappearing. So maybe we should do the same. But you
as you prefer, we can share them for you if you want.
Yeah, would be better.
We're just getting that sorted on our side, and will just be a minute. In the meantime, Bernard, if you've seen the results of the most pressing knowledge needs, and you want to draw your conclusions in regards of those findings in the survey, democratic being the most present knowledge needs, and see how that library reflects on that.
Yeah, maybe I can comment a little bit when I come.
When you come there, yes.
Which are most researched. Yeah, so we can start now. So I don't know if we can go to the next slide, because I cannot command it. Yeah. So as said, one of the output of this working group was to set up an online collaborative library, and it is powered by a collaborative bibliographic tool which is called Zotero. And we will demonstrate. Maybe you can see it at the end of the presentation. So what we have done is to collect the most relevant research on civil society organizations in Europe, but have been published in scientific international reviews or journals in English. So it's limited the scope in a way. And at least we had a free objective with doing this work. One was to provide the foundations for a mapping of the state of research and knowledge on civil society in Europe. The other one was to make it possible or make this mapping available to the community of stakeholders, both researchers and organizations. And also the idea of collaborative online tools is to allow the crowdsourcing of references, both in order to keep the mapping updated, but also in order to enrich it and to get some more, maybe not only scientific publications, but also literature which may be interesting for all stakeholders. So in this way, we launch a call for your contribution, and you may put new references in the library in order to enrich it. So the way it's done, we have constituted a database of 650 published references in English. It's available online. It's possible to add references, and it can be used to different purposes. One would be to generate bibliographies, but also you can search it and get the references and maybe read the abstracts and then search for the read publications. So if we go to the next slide, so the way we have done that is to use some scientific bibliographic database, so, such as IC, Web of Science, Scopus, Science Direct, and so on. And we search with some terms. So one was to cover the different conception of civil society, voluntary organization, association, non-profit organization, and so on. In this field of research, and to focus on Europe. So both at European level, but also all the countries of Europe and the cross-national comparative perspective on it. So that's the way we proceed to identify the references. So if we go to next. So what we have done also is to make subdirectories in order to classify the references thematically. So that's a list of the subdirectories. It's not, I mean, it's not always easy to put the reference under a subdirectory or topic, because they may belong to different types of topics, but we done an effort for that, and it could be also developed and enriched, I think. So we can see the result on the next slide. So that's a picture of the online database. So it can be accessed online, and you can both search it, get the references, and you can also add reference. So the next theme of my presentation is to try to give an overview of what the intellectual field of research on civil society in Europe, based on selected bibliography analysis. So we can go to the next slide. So it's much more reduced than the database, but it covers not only Europe. So typically, it's just about non-profit organization, voluntary organization, and civil society organizations, but it covers the world. So we can go to the next. And if you one approach is to count the publications. So the sample is about 1,000 publications, I think. So what we see, there is a clear dominance of the United States, China, the UK, and Canada when it comes to production of research on civil society organizations. In terms of quantity, how much is published by each countries. We can go to next. And when we look at it over time, so there is a clear growth of the field starting in the 2000s onward. So it has exploded in terms of numbers of publications. We can go to the next slide. So I try to map the field. So that's a co-citation network. That means who are the institutions who are publishing together. not the institution, the journal, which are where there are co-publications. So there are three clusters. One in blue is about management and psychology. The one in red is about public management and administration and non-profit studies. And the third one in green is about organization and sociology. So there are clearly clusters of disciplines within the field of research on civil society organizations. So there are some links, but there are also a clustering or a division of topics of research. We can go to the next. And when we attempt, what is possible to do with this data is to take the keywords of each article and to look how these keywords are co-occurring, how they are occur together in the same article. And we see that there are also two groups of co-occurrence. One is dominated by performance, impact, behavior, motivation, and the other one by management, framework, organization, non-profit, and so on. So there are clearly two main focus of the literature, one on performance, impact, efficiency, and so on, behavior, and the other one on management, organization, and so on. If we look to the next slide, so that's another way to represent these core words within a space. And so it's a little bit complicated analysis, but the essence of it is that there are two axes which represent some dimension. And the first dimension, the horizontal axis, is about, on the left side, is much more about organization or structural conditions. And on the right side, it's much more about individual and behavior. And the second dimension, the vertical dimension, is on the high level, it's about participation, whereas in lower space, it's about governance. So it maps the field across two axes, and then we have five clusters. One in blue, it's about participation, motivation, and performance. The other one in red is about sector governance and management. In violet, it's about non-profit organizations. In green is about behavior and impact. And in orange, a little point, it's about information. So we can see that the research field, the intellectual field, is organized along two axes, and there are five main focus topics in a way. So we can go to the next, and then we can plot within this space which article contribute, which has the most contribution to each cluster. So there are much more contribution on the blue one and on the red one. The blue is about participation, motivation, performance. And the red is about sector governance. So there are these two topics are hot topics within the research literature at the moment. Yeah, we can go to the next. And there, that's the same idea, but there are the most cited articles. And here too, we see also that these two topics, participation, motivation, and performance on one hand, and governance on the other one, and management are also much more cited. So let's confirm the first impression. And finally, I have another slide, which plots these topics according to their relevance on the horizontal axis, and according to the development, whether they are growing or not growing on the vertical axis. And then we can identify different types of topics of themes. On the upper right, we are major themes. On the right, yeah, which on the left it would be more niche themes. On the lower right, that are basic themes, and on the lower left, that are emerging themes. So the motor themes, the most important or driving theme of a literature is management of NPOs and efficiency. The basic theme is about performance and behavior. And we see that association and politics are emerging themes. So in comparison to what the short survey we saw at the beginning, so we saw that politics and the contribution of association to democracy was the most important to our audience today, but it's an emerging themes, and the focus has been, at least in 20 past years, about management, accountability, and so on. And we can go to the next slide, which shows the collaboration network. And here, that also confirms the first impression, because we have a dominance of the USA, of China, and the UK. So the three countries are contributing most, both in terms of production, but also in terms of collaboration within the production of research. And from this, I have a last slide showing some conclusions. Summing up, first is the domination of these three countries, or 3 or 4 countries, including Canada. The significant growth of the field since the 2000s. 3 academic subfields: non-profit and public management, management and psychology, and organization and sociology. So the political science is not very represented in the production of research. The domination of a topic related to management and performance efficiency. So the economic perspective on non-profit and civil society organizations. We see that politics and governance are emerging themes, at least. And in my take on all that would be to say that shows in a way the need to strengthen European research and European publication at the international level when it comes to research on civil society organization, and maybe to introduce some topics and research questions which are more relevant to the European context than it is in the international literature, with this domination of the economic and managerial perspective on civil society organization. So I will stop there. Thank you for your attention. And yes, maybe the last slide is also to launch this online collaborative library. So probably the link would be also in the chat. And you can look at it and see how you can use it, and also help us to enrich it by contributing and putting new references in the base. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernard, for this very rich presentation and analysis of European of scientific literature on European CSOs. So yeah, the link to the library is in the chat, so feel free to go and have a look at it. And we also added a second wait, I'm just checking what you're saying. So yeah, the link to access the library is there, and there is a second one to share your references all in one post. So please feel free to contribute to it. The library is open to professional references as well. So far, Bernard has gathered only scientific references, which is already a lot of work. So now we count on you, since you're a majority of civic actors, to share with us your key references regarding European CSOs in English. It's an important point. This library is all in English. So now let's take some questions from the public for you, Bernard. One was more of a comment that said that it would be very useful to make a survey of studies made in individual countries in their original language.
Yeah,
so what's your comment on that?
Difficult not to agree, but that's a challenge, because first you have to speak all the languages in Europe, and the other one is that you need to have a base or collect in a way which are possible to analyze quantitatively the references. So it would be an interesting research endeavor, I think, but that's maybe one of the issues, if I am allowed to, is that the field of research on civil society is underfunded. Consider the importance of civil society, both in terms of people who are engaged in civil society, the number of organizations and so on, and there are very few researchers comparatively with other fields, for example, labor market or and there are also a crucial lack of funding. So it's very difficult to advance knowledge without labor force and funding. So, yeah.
Yes, for sure. And that's also why we aim at launching a program that will have that dimension of funding research at the European level. But I think with that question also comes the issue of language barriers. I mean, it's hard enough to do what you've done here in the English language, but of course, yes, you'd have to speak. You'd have to have teams, multilingual teams, working on the project like the one that is suggested in the comments. And it's of course, it doesn't help researchers to cooperate with one another when they can't access research that is only published in vernacular languages. So there is something here to do with the language barrier, and that surely doesn't help cooperation at the international level. We've seen that in France. In France, we have referenced over 4,000 references on French associations at the Institute. Some of them are on lateral libraries, not all of them though, not yet. But there is a lot of work that is done there, but it needs to be accessible and centralized, and surely language can be difficult here. I see we've had some other questions when we were as we were chatting, so I'm just going to have a look there. One is about artificial intelligence. It says artificial intelligence could help with assimilating the study to all specific European languages. That's really the main challenge for the European context, as the North American, Chinese extra literatures are not representative of the European context. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
It's possible to use artificial intelligence for treating this data. So what I was pointing out is that in order to do that, you need to have available database which collect the literature. So I don't know everything about all the European countries, but what is existing today is databases that are international. So, for example, IC Web of Science, but is collecting all publication in all international journals in English. So that's the starting point for doing this kind of analysis. So if you haven't equivalent in all language, so it's very difficult. So the first one would be to have this database, and the other one is to you could use artificial intelligence to translate and make this kind of analysis. So the point to do it on what I done here on the international publications was to see what is the share of European publication compared to the rest of the world. And that's the result was surprising in a way. So it's probably due also, there are many reasons for that, but that means that most of the literature is driven by English-speaking countries. Except China, so that's another case, and that's also impact on what kind of conception of civil society and organizations that are promoted in this type of literature and within research.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, because one of the questions was how come China is so active in its CSO publishing?
That's also a surprise, but there are two things. One is that China has invested very much on research, and there are a lot of people doing research in China on civil society organizations, and they are very active in international publication. That's one thing. And the other thing which surprised me when I was editor of the Voluntas, it's that how is it that we can study civil society in non-democratic countries? But China is a very particular country in a way because they promote civil society organization under the control of a state. So that means that they have something which is a kind of civil society, but without freedom. It's that's another model in a way, and they study a lot what is going on in these organizations. Yeah.
Is it the gongos that we talked about in the working group?
No, because they have a system where they, in order to set up an organization, you need to have a mother organization, which in a way guarantee that you will behave. And the mother organization needs to have a mother and so on. So at the end of the chain, you have the state that say, okay, it's okay. There is a kind of social control on civil society. That means that they do a lot of similar things than we do in civil society organization, except they cannot criticize or contest the established power. So.
That's an interesting field as well. Just so you know, this question was sent with best wishes from Medellin, Colombia. Maybe we can move on to another question about the geographical perimeter of the library. It's a good question. How was Europe defined in the library project? Is it EU or Europe beyond EU? And if so, who counts in?
Yeah. So when it comes to Europe, so we search for all the countries within Europe as a continent, and we search for the term Europe and the term EU or European Union. So it covers both in a way.
Just a reminder that our working group has set the perimeter of our work to the Council of Europe. So that's wider than the European Union. Without Russia, I should add, yes. We have a question from France about the limited number of scientific publications coming from France. Is this due to language barrier, and can the publications be translated into English after they have been published in one country? It's actually an interesting question that relates to how scientific journals operate.
Yeah, I think there are two elements. One is the language barrier. That means for many European people, not only French, difficult to go over to English, to publish in English. So, and the other thing is also that they are, at least in France and in Germany, maybe over in Spain and so on. So in Italy, there is a research community in the language. So that means that you don't need, I mean, you can do a career as a researcher, and you don't need to publish in English. It's not. I mean, you're doing fine in your own language, so there is no really incentive. Or for some people, they become more international, but for many, so there's no need. In small countries like Norway or I don't know, Switzerland and so on, so it's much more difficult to. Switzerland, at least they can both be in France or in Germany, but in Norway, so it's very difficult not to publish in English, because otherwise you have no really people to talk to. So,
yeah, and the Netherlands were actually quite high in your charts, I think.
yeah. So there are kind of structural elements and incentives that explain the result in a way, but it's also, I mean, the ideas that are dominating the research field are also most coming from English-speaking countries. So that's a challenge, I think.
We have another question regarding. Yeah, it's an interesting one regarding publications on civil society movements that are not declared. So, you know, like, yes, unofficial civil society, undeclared civil society, and namely on issues such as climate and transitions. Did you manage to include that, like social, like movements or like social movements, or informal civil society in the library?
Yeah, so to a limited extent. I think that's the problem with this kind of exercise, is that you need to define a scope for the search. So anyway, you will need to cut somewhere, and so it's not a perfect result. So we are aware about that, and that's the reason why I think we discussed that we want to have a community-based tool, and that's a start. It's not the end of the library. So the idea is that if people contribute to it, it would be enriched both in terms of scope and also maybe topics we have not looked at or didn't find really contributions and so on. So that's a start.
Maybe one final question, and sorry, I have a few coming here, so I need to choose one. It's not necessarily easy. Someone's asking if we could have a perspective on the lacks we are facing on knowledge about European CSOs. Are some countries not sufficiently covered? I don't know if that might relate to the question of language, again, the language barrier.
Yes,
because that was an English library, so it would be different if you were to look at national.
The number of publications per country will depend both on the extent to which there is community or research which is developed and the extent to which they're published in English. So there are two parameters, and clearly there are huge inequalities between European countries. Some are more developed in terms of research on this field, and some are more publishing internationally than others. So yeah.
Okay, maybe we can have one last question regarding cooperation with with the rest of social economy sector, and are the thematics do they cover the rest of the social economy sector?
No. So we made this choice because to focus on the equivalent of associations in France. So we use the terms which are the closest to association in English, including associations, but not only. And we didn't look for social economy or cooperatives and so on. So the limit of the research is about association.
Thank you, Bernard. I think we might be good for now, as we've reached the end of our time here. So, well, thank you, Bernard. Unless you wanted to add something.
No, thank you very much for.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Bernard, for this and for the great work you've done on this library. So please feel free to go and check it and add your references if you have any to suggest. And sorry if we didn't manage to get all the questions answered. There were many interesting questions, and yeah, just not enough time to answer them all. So we'll go for a break, and we'll be back at sorry, let me check here. 3:55, so that's a 13-minute break. Maybe we can quickly show on the screen the time when we're expected to be back, so that we all know when to start back. But that will be 3:55. Well, thank you all, and see you in a bit. Use this time to go and have a walk, get some fresh air, get away from your screen, and we'll see you soon.
Je défais mon partage.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a nice break. Well, so Thierry has presented the main knowledge gaps that participants to our working groups have identified. And Bernard has presented the state of the art regarding research on European CSOs. Now, Florian Covelli is going to join us again to present, this time, a series of recommendations that our working group has come up with to foster knowledge on CSOs. Florian, our working group has confirmed the need to set up a knowledge program at the European scale. The participants to this group have drafted a series of recommendations to this end. Can you tell us what these recommendations are? And I'll just share some slides for you here while you get started.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Okay, here we are. So If we consider both the great needs of knowledge and the weakness of the current research to meet them, then it confirms the need to set up a knowledge program on a European scale on CSOs and democracy. And this is an important goal for our institute. Aiming at the implementation of a knowledge program, we believe there are several conditions that have to be met. There is a kind of natural distance between CSOs and research, which is often wrongly considered too theoretical and not enough short-term oriented. And as a consequence, CSOs and their partners don't take advantage of the literature, and knowledge is not transformed into strong skills. For this reason, there is a lot of work to be done in order to raise awareness among CSOs on how research can be useful to them. It can enrich their strategic visions, help them analyze major trends and adapt to them. Then we have to use strategies for wide knowledge disseminations. For instance, it could be useful to encourage the writing of summaries of research work in accessible, short and multilingual formats. Regular interactive conferences on those topics could also help. Another recommendation was to set up a digital platform for researchers, CSOs and their stakeholders that could not only list books and articles which we have already initiated with our online library, but that could also list ongoing or planned projects in order to foster collaborations. If we want to close the gap between CSOs and research, and we want, if we want knowledge to be better disseminated, it will be important to encourage cooperation between CSOs and academia. We also think that the participatory research could be a lever for connecting researchers and practitioners while co-producing knowledge. Next recommendation, Bernard has remarkably demonstrated that the topic of CSOs and especially of the contribution of CSOs to democracy is still marginal in the scientific literature. In order to make it more visible in academia, we believe it necessary to set an academic agenda, and in particular to structure an academic community in line with the needs of CSOs. It is in this perspective that we have produced this white paper as well as the digital library, and we think that they can be useful tools both for raising awareness in the CSOs and for structuring an academic community. We also think it's very useful that this future academic community be well connected to the already existing organizations that produce knowledge or promote CSOs. This was an objective for our working group, and this is why we wanted to include an initial mapping of this network of actors in our white paper. Lastly, we know that the language barrier, and Bernard has spoken about it, is an obstacle to transnational research, especially because vernacular publications that are not translated into English are difficult to access. And if we want to build a European research agenda on CSOs, we will have to think about the material conditions to overcome this language barrier. We can go to the second slide, Claire, thank you. And after that, the specificity of our topic of discussion and the knowledge needs we have identified call for a series of methodological recommendations for researchers. And I would like to mention a few of them. First of all, documenting the national situations and definitions of CSOs would make it possible to highlight common characteristics and also differences. And a transnational comparison of the democratic role of CSOs will constitute an innovative research axis. As a second recommendation, it will be important to mobilize all useful disciplinary approaches: sociology, political science, economics, history, anthropology, law, and many others. We have also seen in series presentation that there are many aspects and concepts to be clarified, as many different facets to understand CSOs. And finally, in support of comparative studies, we will need to strengthen works on comparative law, but also to work on the conditions for harmonizing national statistics. And then our last recommendation is to better connect research to training and education, that is to say school and university education, and adult training, such as lifelong learning, but also training in the administration and public authorities sector, and also internal training of CSOs. It seems to us that training and education are a major lever to reinforce the recognition and the role of CSOs in society and democracy.
Thank you, Florian, for sharing this ambitious set of recommendations with us. We've now reached the end of the first part of this webinar. We've presented you CSOs needs, CSOs knowledge gaps, their need of knowledge, but also the state of the art in European research. And Florian has just presented recommendations for a future knowledge program. So now I suggest we move on to the second part of this webinar, which is a roundtable discussion. Mr. Lagodinsky, Sophie van Malleghem, Claire Toury, and Anna Dommartin, can you please join us on the floor? I think everyone is here. Okay, so we wanted to bring together a panel of experts from a CSO, philanthropy, academia, and from the European Parliament in order to discuss CSO's contribution to democracy, but also to discuss their priority knowledge needs and the way knowledge can be a lever and a resource for CSOs and for democracy. We are delighted to welcome our panelists. Claire Toury, you're the president of Le Mouvement Associatif, the main French umbrella organization for associations. You're also a board member of the French Institute for Civil Society Organizations, and you were part of the steering committee of our working group on CSOs in Europe. Sergey Lagodinsky, you're a member of the European Parliament in the group of the Greens European Free Alliance. You are the vice chair of the Legal Affairs Committee and coordinator of the Greens EFA campaign, Defend Civil Society. Sophie van Malleghem, you're a senior project coordinator of the social engagement program at the King Baudouin Foundation. And Anna Dommartin, you're a sociologist and director of the Civil City Lab at the Institute for Social Studies at the University of Warsaw. You're also a member of the International Society for Third Sector Research Board of Directors. Let me begin. So first, thank you all of you for being with us today. It's a great pleasure to be able to discuss this very important topics with this panel of experts that you represent from your own fields. So Claire, let me begin with you. Le Mouvement Associatif, which you lead, aims to promote the development of CSOs so they can contribute to a more human, just, and sustainable society. The Mouvement Associatif, which you lead, federates and represents one out of two French associations. So my question to you as a representative of CSOs is related to your thoughts on CSO's contribution to democracy. How, in your opinion, can a thriving civil society contribute to a vibrant civic space? And what can you tell us about the recent evolutions of public policies and on the ways they can impact CSOs?
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for organizing this extremely interesting exchange. So to begin with, we can start by asking, what are CSOs? What are associations? Well, it means that you have at least two people who decide to get organized together for any reason proper to themselves, maybe lead a territory, uphold a cause, protest, and then they can grow to 3, 4, 5, and it can become a crowd. And so we have 1.5 million associations of, including volunteers. So this is a space of freedom, and we're celebrating 123 years because, sorry, 122 years because the legislation on contrat d'association in France was edicted 122 years ago. This legislation, this law, is quite modern and people still uphold it, and we want to keep it for a series of reasons. So to be an association means that you work with people who don't necessarily think like you. This is interesting because you can form alliances, and you have a common objective, a collective objective, and you have to have compromises, you journey together. And so this is a democratic exercise which really will give you responsibilities and a power to act. This is my preamble because it says what an association is compared to an individual. Now, what is the effect or the impact of an association of organized civil society? And if we want to have all of the intermediary bodies, associations, ever since they've been in existence, are a space of innovation, and they can be working as a system of alert. For instance, family planning. This is a feminist movement product to help women proclaim that they are free to decide about their own bodies. And those associations, family planning, environmental associations that we talk about much today, and then the Ligue des Droits de l'Homme, and we've been talking about it a lot in France. So these are merely examples. These associations can be a space for innovation because they have projects, they innovate, and they have a function of feedback of the people's feeling to those in the establishment, but they also represent a possibility to alert politicians, authorities, and other citizens about situations that might be unfair, and they might provoke some reaction. They can alert about issues or other problems. And we are at a turning point in France, at least here in France, in order to move out of this democratic crisis. We need a representative democracy because we don't want to contest those who have the legitimacy of the nation. Then you have also the social aspect of a organized civil society. As intermediary bodies, you need to be organized to highlight what is not so nice. And then you have participative democracy, because if you have citizens who are well educated, they want to be involved in their future, in deciding about the future. But the context today is quite worrying because over the last 15 months, there is a new text called Le Contrat d'engagement républicain, which has been which has had the unanimous reaction of the CSOs. And it says that associations need to comply with the values of the French Republic. It means that you need to agree with those principles. And the serious part is that it means that the associations that actually contribute to the values of the French Republic could actually be a hindrance. And we want to protest about this because this has serious impact on hindering the freedom of association, actually, but it also has concrete consequences and social consequences, because if you hinder the association themselves, there is a whole series of things that cannot be implemented.
Mr. Lagodinsky, you have been a member of the European Parliament since July 2019, where you are the Deputy Chairman of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Chairman of the Delegation to the EU-Turkey Joint Parliamentary Committee. You're the initiator and rapporteur for the new attempts to create a European Statute for Associations, which you presented in the Lagodinsky report to the European Commission. The report includes a proposal for a regulation for the new legal form of the European Association, and also a directive to create EU-wide minimum standards for civil society organizations. This report was adopted by a cross-party majority of MEPs on the 17th of February 2022. The preparation of the law is currently underway in the Directorate General for Internal Market, Industry, Entrepreneurship, and Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises. And the presentation of the legislative proposal is expected for June 2023. As an elected member of the EU Parliament, we'd be very interested in hearing what is, in your opinion, the role of associations in the shaping and resilience of society, but also to hear your perception of the interplay between public policies and collective citizen action. Finally, we'd like to hear how will a European statute for associations and EU-wide minimum standards benefit CSOs, society, and democracy? In 3 minutes, if you can answer to those many questions in 3 minutes, please.
Yes, sure. I'll try to be brief. Thank you very much, and thanks for this very important discussion. Very briefly, my understanding of the role of civil society is twofold. Number one, in Europe, if we're talking about democracy, then it's not enough to talk about institutions. It's not just enough to talk about parliament, a stronger parliament or more accountable commission. It is important also to talk about two other things. One, a European public sphere, because we cannot talk about truly European democratic elections without a public sphere, which is also democratic and European. And number two, a European civil society, a free civil society and European civil society. And my proposal aims at precisely these 2 points. Number one, we should introduce a legal form which will be European. Let's say, why do we have European companies as a special legal form, and we still don't have European associations, or for that matter, European non-profits or non-profit foundations? By doing so, we would allow people, citizens to engage together also across borders without having to commit to one or other jurisdiction and feel truly European in their common effort. Number two, and I think this is also important, I pledge for introducing minimum standards for treating of NGOs by their national governments. And this is the second document that I will introduce as part of my, my report. If we want a free democratic space in Europe, we need a free and secure space for NGOs and associations. And these are the safeguards that I propose. The Commission is looking into that. They're preparing something based on the report that I introduced, and we're looking forward to their proposals that will probably come out in June. Now, whether they will satisfy all the ambitions that we proposed or not, we will have to see. But I think it's moving in the right direction. Finally, after 30 years of fighting for something as an association legal form, we would probably see something that will be moving in the direction we need. With that, I hope I was able to meet the 3 minutes limitation.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. Even less than that. So thank you for your brief answer. And thank you as well for being the initiator to this very important law. We are looking forward to seeing the outcome of it in June. I now turn to Sophie. Sophie, the King Baudouin Foundation encourages effective philanthropy among individuals and businesses. The foundation has developed a model combining transparency, performance, and democratic accountability to ensure the quality of its work with CSOs. The foundation has published a book on a European outlook on philanthropy, which reflects on the role that philanthropy plays in democracy. Could you share with us your perspective on how can philanthropy foster civil society's contribution to society and democracy in Europe?
Thank you, Claire, for this introduction. And I would like to salute first the contribution you make today to the cause and for sharing the amazing library. It's the first time in history that I saw in Europe, so a library, so thanks for that. Maybe I may begin with our position. We as Belgium, but European Foundation, and we like to say that for us, we work like an hourglass. We have our donors, enterprise, individual, but we are also always in contact with the civil society by grant making, by organizing studies for them, and by organizing a networking event. If I may, I feel more comfortable in French, then I will switch in French. I know that there is a translation. Ce sera plus confortable pour moi. La Fondation Roi Baudouin.
So the King Baudouin Foundation has been redistributing to more than 5,000 groups the donations that they have received. This is a social sphere, and it's a vehicle of democracy. And for us, this is a pluralistic concept. For us, this means that it's innovation, as Claire was saying. You can alert to certain issues, but also in the traditional approach of what we do in the field to remedy to inequalities and to go towards more democracy. So this plural approach or pluralistic approach is the support that we give to the whole sector, and we, thanks to the donations we receive, it becomes possible. We also fund researches on thematic elements, on social justice, on European approaches, but we also have a society engagement. What is this program of society engagement? Well, we have studies and surveys on raw data produced by our institutions, and we give it to the associations. And here we have this triangulation because we want to beef up the knowledge or remedy the knowledge gap in favor of DCSSPA. You've been talking about Hopkins University research work, and at the Banque Nationale de Belgique, we adopted the same methodology, and so we're going to purchase the data from the Banque Nationale, National Bank, so that it can be made available to the the CSOs, and so on various themes, and this can be used for the advocacy of the CSOs themselves to try to also meet the needs of politicians in terms of knowledge, and this is useful for members of parliament. So there is a part of the ecosystem which highlights knowledge, and for the foundation this is really important to be able to fund that type of research. Thank you.
Very much, Sophie, for this. I now turn to Anna. Anna, your research interests focus are on CSOs, social movements, and local activism in urban contexts. You specialize in intersectional and international comparative research in the areas of gender sociology and urban studies. You also contributed to our working group. When we prepared this discussion, you've mentioned a form of hierarchy between CSOs in Eastern and Western European countries, but also a dominating US-led narrative on CSOs in Europe, which Bernard has highlighted actually with the presentation of the library. Well, this seems to highlight two issues. First of all, there are different histories across Europe, and namely specific development in post-communist countries. But there's also a lack of a pan-European narrative that could overcome the differences in our respective civil societies. Could you tell us more on that and share your recommendations to overcome those issues?
Thank you so much, Claire. I definitely agree that there is a need for opening a new discussion on this topic. And it's a huge challenge because we are coming from very different contexts with very different histories. And another challenge is that there are quite huge disparities in terms of defining power that some of the countries have. And you could see that in Bernard's presentation very clearly, that if there is a lot of writing, if there is a lot of money and funding or big founders behind this certain type of definition, then of course it will be dominant in the field. And what it means for countries like Poland, and very soon it will also mean for countries like Ukraine, I hope, within the European ecosystem, is that we have a certain blindness to different forms of civil society organizing that are very important and are more of a local flavors, but very important essence of civil society engagement in those countries. So what I'm trying to say is that what we are seeing right now is a certain dominance, and also this performative power of the definition that is connected, for example, with the Johns Hopkins project, which I can applaud in many ways for this its strength to compare different countries and different cultures and actually calculate what has been, if the civil society is growing or shrinking and so on. But on the other hand, there seemed to be a big gap in terms of actually understanding the movement and the essence of the local civil society organizing. And I think it's there's a certain level of fight going on at the moment to control this narrative, and we should be an important actor in that, coming from the data and also coming from the practice. And I'm really happy to have this meeting to open up the discussion. I think it's a great opportunity, Claire.
Thank you, Anna. Well, we've heard different perspectives on how CSO and democracy are connected at the European level. And we've started hearing about knowledge a little bit. And I'd like to now maybe focus more on the issue of how knowledge can be a lever to foster CSO capacity building and to raise awareness on CSO's many contributions to society and to democracy. So, Claire, how do you think that knowledge can be a lever to foster awareness of CSO's contribution to society in France and in Europe? Claire, I don't know if you heard my question, if it's, or you're muted, I don't know.
Si, mais j'étais pas sûre que c'était moi qui commençais.
Yeah, because there was the translation. Yeah.
Oui, alors, je vais tenir le temps cette fois. Moi, je dirais que l'enjeu de...
I would say that what is at stake here with knowledge and the work that has been done is this. When we started our work with the working groups, we were confronted with the issue of definition and translation. How do we say monde associatif in other languages? How do we use the proper language? And we see what Mr. Lagodinsky has done in his report. The French model, which I represent here, is very specific. And so what was at stake was to really create the network, see how the various associations or CSOs work in Europe. Because what I was saying earlier is that what's important is to create a movement to win the cultural war, so to speak. We can say that some of our cultures are at risk or at peril, and so we need to make sure that these associations should be protected in France and other countries. We need to see what difficulties we're facing, and also our responsibility, our common responsibility, this can be held by research, is to find the proper words to describe the proper situation. And this is important to win the cultural battle. And this is a conflict of legitimacy. So why a conflict of legitimacy? On the one hand, the representatives who are elected, and Look at what is going on in France now in the protest against the reform of retirement. The people are protecting. So you have those who are legitimate, the elected, and those who protest. And then another element of legitimacy is the elected people and the organizations who are alerting to certain facts. Look again at what is happening here about the basins and what is happening, who is right. And we have two different positions. One is supported by the state, the administration, which presupposes that the other position is not legitimate. And so you have a battle of power, so to speak. And so divergency could be constructive, but this divergency means that you can actually hinder the action of the one to benefit the other. And this is why it's important to be numerous and to really understand what we're talking about so that we can do some networking and try to make headways in this battle ahead of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, for this insights on how knowledge can really help CSOs at the European level collaborate with one another. I now turn to Sophie. As part of the social engagement program that you've briefly presented, the King Baudouin Foundation runs an observatory of social engagements, which conducts research to monitor development, trends, and particularities of the sector. You've said a few words about that, but I'd be interested in hearing more about why the foundation decided to reinforce knowledge on CSOs and how it benefits society. When we prepared this discussion, you've told me about a few examples that were very interesting, and it'd be nice if you could share them with our public.
Well, so why the foundation has these studies? Well, because we have this leverage effect, which could lead to a greater impact for associations, individuals who are acting in favor of the collective good. So we decided that to strengthen the CSO's work or reinforce it, we thought that was something to be done. We've been conducting these surveys for more than 10 years. And the conclusion is that here in Belgium, the sector has a vested interest in this as well as we. 7 organizations out of 10 have the Renan model of subsidiarity or complementarity to what the state is doing. So the third sector or CSOs in general. But what does that say about the payments which are made? Because we're talking about payments, subsidies, allocations for projects, not for the structure, which means that the structures sometimes have difficulties because they have to uphold a project, but they are facing other difficulties regarding the buildings that host them. Another thing is that in the sector, the level of qualification does not necessarily meet the possible salaries which would be paid in the sector. And so there is a high level of turnover in democratic structures. And this is what we saw with the Banque Nationale of Belgium. Some work conducted by women is part-time work. And this means that it has its own special constraints or limitations. And we are trying to contribute to a better understanding of the sector and what is at stake here. And I'm really happy to be part of this seminar today because this makes even more sense at European level because it dovetails with the ecological or environmental considerations. All the consolidated data will certainly have a greater impact, but unfortunately, it depends on subsidies that authorities really need to better define.
For this, and it's great to see that the foundation does this work of observation that is very much needed. Mr. Lagodinsky, now in your opinion, how could a better knowledge on CSO's contribution to society and democracy be useful to MEPs or to European institutions?
Well, one thing is very instrumental. We have always an impact assessment and the whole process that is necessary before actually something becomes a legislative act proposed by the Commission. So a lot of their proposals, also the proposal they will be making regarding my report, are based on knowledge. And the more knowledge we have, the better. I also do think, and I see this now in my everyday work, that of course we as legislators can only legislate if we have an empirical basis for this. Ideology alone is not enough. For me, it's instrumental, and it's important to travel, to talk to organizations, to see what the problems are. And in fact, the whole report was based on my talks to either organizations on the border area, for example, between Germany and Poland, whom I met, where I specifically asked what are the problems, how can we bridge them with European means. Or data sets and reports, because if we don't know what we're legislating, we will not be able to legislate, and we will not be able to convince, frankly, you know, what Claire said, or Sophie and Anna. Every country has a unique landscape and unique traditions of civil engagement, and it doesn't make sense to legislate something that we think is beneficial for others. We should legislate something that others think are beneficial for themselves. And for all of this, we need, of course, an empirical basis, and we need the knowledge that you mentioned before.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lagodinsky, for these insights as an MEP. Now, I finally turn to you, Anna. As a researcher, why and how do you think that research should be connected to civil society organizations?
Yes, that's a really great question, and one that I can, with well, reply to with a lot of belief and potential for cooperation between academia and civil society organization. We don't see as much of it as is necessary, I think, and in my contacts with different networks and also singular organizations, I could very often feel this hunger for knowledge, hunger for the opportunity to compare yourself with a wider group of similar animals, and also to learn from each other. So I think our role as researchers is to create a certain platform and allow organization to learn about each other, and also to feel the strength of the sector in a way. So by counting and by understanding better, I think we can give a certain importance to what is going on in the civil society. And I think this is a very important mission for researchers. At the other hand, of course, we can see that there is a need to actually ask civil society, or especially civil society organizations, what are their research needs? And we don't do it very often. So again, I hope that this type of meeting is a starting point for this type of exchange, and actually pressing the academia to give civil society a very meaningful answers to important questions. We will not do it without you. That let me put it simply, because we are prone to diagnose and discuss ideas for too long, usually. But what I think is really important is also to look at research as a very diverse field. And in this research, you can see both the quantitative and qualitative approach to civil society. And the quantitative is the one that we talked about quite a lot. It's very economy or politics driven, and we end up having this approach with this management efficiency dominance in the field that, again, Bernard was mentioning. I'm not sure if at this stage, this is exactly what we need. We've been talking quite a lot about freedom. I would also add expression of needs, and also different ways of fulfilling your needs. I think the civil society is also a very important sphere for that, to actually fix your own problems without the state and without the specific institutions. So I think it calls for maybe more space for qualitative approach, and that would allow us to both discern between the pro and anti-democratic notions within civil society, but also to look at the new types of civil society engagement and to actually discover and understand the complexity of what we are talking about. And an example of that is the growing digital activism, or the development of the virtual worlds like metaverse, in which very soon we can see quite a lot of associative behavior, and we have absolutely no tools to measure it yet or to talk about it yet. So I think such areas are undiscovered, and I hope that researchers will join me in thinking about how to grasp it for the benefit of practitioners.
Well, thank you very much, Anna, for these insights, and we're very happy also to have the space to discuss all of that with you today. And we're hoping that, yes, indeed, it is just the start, and we're very much looking forward to keep working on those topics with CSOs, with academia, with EU institutions, with public authorities, with philanthropy. That's very important to keep working collectively on those issues. We are actually a bit early, so you've all done very well on your timing, which leaves us some extra time for Q's and A's. So I suggest we can maybe start with Mr. Lagodinsky. We have questions coming from Carlotta Besozzi, who's the coordinator from Civil Society Europe. States that they are definitely worried about the developments in France, but also the attempts to export these bad practices and other ones at the EU level. In particular, they expect an EU foreign interference law that the European Commission is preparing in the context on the defense of democracy package that will be released at the end of May. Another question that is linked to the first one is if you could say, like, present a bit more the minimum national standards for government treatments of NGOs.
Well, thank you. I just launched a little campaign of my own where I alert the public on the plans of this, as I call it, Foreign Agent Act. This is something that I look at with a lot of concern, not least because I work also on foreign policy, and I have seen, and we all have witnessed what the judgmental and terrible, tragic role these laws have played both in Russia vis-a-vis civil society, but also similar attempts in Turkey, attempts in Georgia, and of course the infamous attempt in Hungary that had to be reversed by courts. I am concerned we don't know what shape and what content this act will have. I understand and I respect, of course, the concerns about foreign interference, especially in a situation like we are having. But we should be very careful not to copy bad practices, even in a situation of crisis, and to put even more pressure on the civil society, which is already under a lot of pressure now. I'm also concerned that there was no impact assessment done, that's what I heard, by the Commission regarding that law. This is precisely what we need. We need an impact assessment here as well. So I would like to, first of all, see how the content is going to be. And if there is a problematic content, we will have to push hard back, because we cannot afford having an foreign agents law in the European Union. This was a cornerstone of our criticism of Russia early on, and we cannot go on the same path. Regarding the minimum standards, there are various issues. One of them is, for example, a standard of non-discrimination, that organizations should not be discriminated due to their the political desirability of their goals. They should not be discriminated according to the source of their financing. We have the same issue that I mentioned again in the differentiating. So no additional taxes should be imposed just because organizations are doing something that is not likable and not to the liking of the government. No members should be subjected to prosecution just if they are legal members in legal entities like NGOs and associations. So merely a membership should not be a ground for criminal prosecution. I think that we should, one of my proposals would also be to introduce a European definition of non-for-profit status or charitable status. I think it would be useful also for foundations to have more clarity on what is considered Europe-wide a charitable status, which is both tax deductible but also has other benefits. This would already be a step forward in our European path to a European civil society which is free and transboundary.
Thank you, Mr. Lagodinsky. I see that Anna wants to say a few words here, reaction to this question.
Yeah, yes, if we still have a moment, I just wanted to very much support what Mr. Lagodinsky said. I think we are in a very interesting moment of our history here in Europe, and we should in a way try to set new standards, maybe also for the global community, not to be too shy about really promoting certain values and also forms of legitimacy. I think what could be really helpful here, to summarize what I was talking about earlier, is this something that we could call a new network and knowledge base that I think we are actually part of today. So there is a lot of effort behind what we are discussing. This collection of publication, collection of data, collection of definitions as well, and also experiences from different places. I think it could be the beginning of the research agenda on civil society in Europe. And what I think is important in that context is that we should not close ourselves in Europe. So why not think really globally and also look for different positive examples coming from other regions like South America, for example, or just to have a better feel about what we want to achieve by this type of framework. I think it's better to look at very diverse examples of activism. We are now holding a very interesting series of workshops and web seminars in the ISTR discussing the future of the civil society research. And one of the topics that comes up very often is that certain regions are very isolated. And I think this is, again, an opportunity to look at those regions' experiences and practices and make sure that we incorporate, for example, the experience of Syrians when we are discussing civil society, because it brings in a completely different culture. It brings in new challenges, but it's also a test of what we are building. So let's not do it on this very ideological, old school European level, but really an open discussion that treats participants equally with their experiences.
Thank you, Anna. Claire, do you want to add to this? I mean, you might have. No, you don't. Okay, okay. So let me see.
J'ai juste envie de rajouter quelque chose, si je peux me permettre.
If I may. I think that what Anna is suggesting regarding the qualitative and quantitative aspect of studies in a group like this one, it's interesting to have the voice of CSOs, regardless of what we put in place, a webinar, a seminar, a workshop. I think that we should not isolate those who think and those who act. So we need to integrate in our studies, in our workshops, in our libraries, those who have first-hand experience, so that they can also have their own share of responsibility.
Thank you, Sophie. We have a question for Anna that relates to actually the foreign influence legislation. So I think it makes sense to address that now. Transparency and accountability in supporting CSOs can connect to foreign influence legislation that we've observed at the global level and which have considerably restrained independent civil society and used to put out and have been used to put out criticism from CSOs. Can you tell us a bit more about those evolutions, if you want to add to what you said before? Unless you feel like you've already covered everything on that topic.
Let me just quickly comment. I think again, looking at the experience of Poland, that is a very interesting evolution that we've been seeing since I was interested in that topic. I could see first the dominance, of course, of this post-Soviet forms of organizing that was in many ways hated by majority of Polish community, and which still remains a blockage for us to engage more people in civil society activities. But then with the revolution of solidarity, we could see the opening for also new funding and new definitions coming from US, and this was a really important and forming process for many of the civil society organizations. And the third stage that we still are in is the European Union dominance in terms of funding, and also coming up with definitions and actually delimiting what is civil society, what is not, so who will receive funding and what type of activities are important. And what I think is the result, it really shows that there is very little room for independent development in countries that have been under some type of, let's say, colonial rule, right? And we have some of those countries here in Europe. So in some places you can see this grassroots long-term. Here, we are really worried about being too much driven by the external actors. And I think, of course, there's quite a lot going on, but this is exactly the informal, unseen blind spot that we cannot really show as part of the democratic transformation, because no one is able to count it, which again puts Poland and other countries similar to us in a position of not being a member of this elite club of good democracies, and creating a lot of problems, because of course, if we have a self-definition of a weak democracy, that we are not going to go into the street and fight for our rights as maybe for such a long term.
Thank you, Anna. Claire, I have a question for you. Sorry, it's in French, I'm translating it as I read it. So what's the contribution of CSOs at the European scale with regards to the democratic crises that we see, and with the continuing loss of legitimacy on the part of traditional European political parties? And should we go towards a European federation of associations?
Alors, je suis pas sûre d'avoir eu toute la question, donc parce qu'il y a un décalage entre les deux.
I'm not sure I have understood the whole question, because there is some latency between what you're saying and what I'm hearing. But it's for sure political parties are experiencing a crisis, and that's not good news, because does that mean that they need to be strengthened, but they can't strengthen themselves alone? And so that's why I was saying that the importance of intermediary bodies, which is of paramount importance. I don't know about Europe, but in France, we were having this discussion with two major actors of CSOs, and we said that the situation is not sustainable as it is now. So we need to react. This could be true at French level, but it could be true at European level. It will contribute to strengthening political parties. Democracy is better organized. I think it was formulated slightly differently in the question. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Je crois que c'est ça. Je me permets du coup de répondre en français.
I think this is true. I'm answering in French. This was the gist of the question, indeed.
La contribution des associations à l'échelle européenne face à la crise démocratique qui se manifeste avec la perte.
Contribution of CSOs and the loss of legitimacy of political parties. I think you answered the question right.
Now a question for Sophie. This question relates to, sorry, missing the word here, mécénat, which our interpreters will be able to translate, I'm sure. The question is about the trend of people who want to get involved through mécénat, kind of like in a very at their very own individual personal scale. This tends to get more generalized. And do you think that the fact that do you see the engagement of young people getting engaged towards climate, the environment, is a European trend that is become generalized, and could researchers work on that?
Il y a deux objets, il y a l'objet du mécénat et du mécénat de compétences peut-être, et puis il y a la question.
Well, we have the issue of patronage regarding skills. So patronage of skills is something that associations, companies have been doing for a long time, and for philanthropies, philanthropic associations and foundation, we feel that any engagement in favor of people, if you have the means, you do it with your knowledge and you do it. So patronage or sponsorship is something good. This is interesting in the interest of democracy, and foundations are trying to encourage this type of sponsorship or patronage of skills. Now, is there more recruitment at European level? I don't know about Europe, but in Belgium, we've been conducting analysis for the sector, and we know that traditional philanthropy is not something of interest to some people. Younger people are more interested in militant philanthropy, and this is the result of a survey we conducted at the foundation.
Thank you, Sophie. Claire, do you want to react to that?
Oui, je veux bien rapidement.
Yes, indeed. I believe there are two things that I want to react to. Mobilization of youth and very young people around major causes. This goes beyond the national framework. And it's interesting because you see that people are getting engaged for elements which really mobilize them. And it's the Greta the Thunberg generation. So not everyone is doing that, and I'm not trying to have an ageist approach, but what you were saying about sponsorship or patronage is interesting, because we see that we are being confronted with a dilemma. How can we mobilize those who are already active? And how do we make sure that the active population will give more time to a cause which is convincing to them? So this is the whole world of foundations and associations, and this is extremely interesting because there needs to be reciprocity. It's not just giving or the salaried worker going to speak to civil society to explain things, but it has something to do with everyday democracy. Right. And board of directors in the private sector are saying we'd like to be in contact with representatives of the sector. You know, the whole movement Gilets jaunes was extremely interesting. So it's not a linear approach. We're trying to get the knowledge where it is and where you perceive it could be found. And this is something that we want to highlight as a foundation.
Guillaume Plaisance, who's actually a laureate, one of our grantees. He says that we are lucky to have the ISTR, the International Society for Third Sector Research, at the global level, which is, for those who don't know it, a network of researchers who study the third sector, in which CSOs are a part of. And he is asking, when are we going to have this network at the European level? We need this to support European political actors, researchers at the European level, and CSOs as well. Well, I think it's pretty clear at the end of this webinar that we are aiming in that direction, and that's what we want to do. And we met in Montreal. We had to go all the way to Montreal to meet each other, which says a lot at the ISTR annual meeting. And you said that ISTR wanted to well, that you were looking to start a European research cluster network, which we're very interested in connecting with this whole momentum that we have here today.
Thank you so much for giving me this push of a motivation. It's been some months since Montreal, and it didn't yet happen, but one of the reasons for that is that Europe is so diverse and has strong subfields of civil society research. So when you look at, for example, again, Latin America, there is a need to come together and to discuss specific issues, while here we are divided by language. We are not really able to so easily understand differences between our civil society characteristics. So it's a very tricky thing to do, but I think the discussion today is showing how important it is. And I myself am really motivated, and I will take it back to our board of directors and talk maybe more about practical ways of just making it happen.
Sure. And we have another question. We've actually a few questions that are related to participatory research, citizen science, asking us if it's something, because it hasn't really been addressed in those discussions. But yes, of course, it's something that we have been working at the Institute. Our last call for research projects was fully addressed to participatory research, and we've funded 7 research projects that are in a participatory approach. So researchers and CSOs co-constructing knowledge together. Will present them soon. I'm not going to say when exactly, but we will in the coming period of time present those 7 research projects that we have supported in participatory research. And those are not the first ones that we have supported. We have grantees that are already working on that. So please refer to our website or get in touch with us if you want to hear more about those. We've reached the end of our time. So thank you very much to all of you for those very interesting discussions. I think you've did a great job of connecting the issues of how CSOs contribute to democracy and to society, and how knowledge research can be a lever to foster their contribution, and how we all need to be much better connected to one another if we want to advance each of our fields, whether we are researchers, CSOs, philanthropic actors, members of the European Parliament, or public authorities. So thank you very much for your time. Looking forward to having those discussions with you in the future. You're more than welcome to stay involved in this project. So thank you so much. The webinar is not over though, so please bear with us. We are gonna now have a word of or a closing speech from Anne-Charlotte Dommartin, who is gonna be, yes, you're here, thank you. So, Ms. Dommartin, you are the delegate for civil society, civic engagement and youth at the French Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs. The ministry has been supporting our work on knowledge of CSOs and democracy in Europe. So thank you very much for your confidence and your support. We're here today because of your support. So we're very grateful for that. And we're very much looking forward to hearing your words for the closing speech of this webinar. Mrs. Dommartin, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup. Est-ce que vous m'entendez bien?
Yes,
thank you. I hope you can hear me. Thank you very much, Claire, and thank you
d'avoir organisé ce séminaire
for organizing this seminar. We are particularly happy at the ministry to have contributed to the achievement of this project, and I'm quite impressed about the large number of participants. I think that we are really dealing here with what is the heart of social missions, and this is what the delegation of our civil society is working for. We are particularly happy to give our support to IFMA today, and I wanted to start by thanking you for the white paper and the online library. Extremely useful tools indeed. And I want to thank also the working group on CSOs in Europe. This actually responds to what we've seen at the ministry. A dynamic, independent civil society is a sine qua non condition to the existence of resilient democracies in Europe. And this is what Madame Matviichuk said at the very beginning. I want to thank her for her contribution at the very beginning of the webinar. And to echo what she was saying, I want to remind the commitment of France, who's supporting the Ukrainian people. We have given more than 215 million euros in humanitarian help, in helping the population to help for food, health, the fight against sexual and sexist attacks. And I want to also support the various collective authorities who are important for these networks of association. It's important to show the support of a civil society to another civil society. And this is also on the aspect of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. I want to say that I'm very happy to remember the initiative of Marianne and those who uphold human rights, Madame Tamila Imanova, in Russian specialist in human rights, and she herself is has been awarded the Nobel Prize of Peace. But I want to get back to what you were saying about associations having an essential role to play. And this is exactly what the ministry has been thinking about developing towards or extending its activity towards the outside. We want to contribute to the strengthening of civil societies in our partner countries and to uphold the civic space everywhere. This is the engine of accountability of public powers. It has been said we are particularly sensitive to the fact that it mobilizes citizens and especially after what the president of the Mouvement Associative said, our discussion today is also a diplomacy of civil society organizations. This is why last year we decided to come up with a new strategy for civil society and citizen engagement with concrete objectives. There are 5 pillars. And when we drafted this, we were confronted with the issue that you mentioned, where to find academic resources, where to find the data. And this is why we decided to support your project, because de facto we were confronted with the same problem that you mentioned. And there is a need of more resources, especially in French or even in other languages, and based on other fields of research than the Anglo-Saxon ones. I know I'm being very French but in saying this, but I think it is essential to have other cultures represented, and we share some of the statements and conclusions that you have presented. There is degradation of the space given to CSOs around the world. In Europe, we see that it was mainly human rights, those who uphold the interest of the environment, of economic and social rights, and freedom of association. It is important for us to have a favorable environment, and we're trying to sensitize our embassies to have approaches with other partners in other European countries to make sure that at European level and international level, we will have a framework of standards which will be favorable to CSOs. And by the way, the National Council for Development and International Solidarity during the pandemic in 2020 held a working group on space given to civil society. And there were a number of recommendations that were addressed to the French public powers, but also to the CSOs themselves. And at the end of 2022, we had an accountability exercise to see what type of recommendations we had actually implemented out of all those that had been suggested by the members of CNDF to work on this issue. Number 2, I'd like to highlight that the Swedish presidency of the Council of the European Union has also contributed to the drafting of the report on the implementation of the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union and the role of civic society. And this was adopted by the Council of Ministers and the Council of Justice on the 10th of March. And in the conclusions, we reaffirm the much needed support and role of CSOs to uphold the fundamental rights in line with the values of the Union. This is a fundamental right and the prevailing role of the CSOs and their representatives. these conclusions are really a development, a major development, because the Council is inviting all the member states to put in place and protect the independent action of CSOs, and this includes the major players of civil society in processes regarding programs and consultations and the drafting of new legislation. Thirdly, regarding a favorable environment and the drafting of suggestions and harmonization of CSO law to come up with common standards. After attending a number of conferences on a number of rights, such as sexual rights and sexual health and reproductive health, I know that there are some member states who are quite shy or reserved, and this was mentioned by some of the speakers regarding making a uniform standard, and they say maybe this type of law could be restrictive and with a smaller common denominator. I think we should be more ambitious, and this is something that we need to be more attentive to, because we are part of European negotiations, and we are not terribly happy about the direction that some of these discussions are taking. This was a key point for me. I want to also insist on the fundamental role, essential role played by organizations of civil society in constructing public policies. This is part of the white paper. Of course, it has an impact on CSOs because of the means made available to them, because of the legislation which concerns them, and vice versa. They have a role of precursor in our society. They are also having an important advocacy role, which means that as public powers, we need to address certain issues such as the gender dimension, the issue of equal treatment between men and women. And this is why our ministry now has a feminist diplomacy. And this is the result of the work conducted by CSOs. And so this is to say that we are particularly mindful of the bridges that can exist between the expertise of CSOs and the expertise of the public authorities, the importance also of what you call intermediary bodies. And this is the reason why we encourage a flow, outgoing and ingoing flow between the public sphere and the CSOs. The issue of sponsoring skills or patronage of skills, as we said, at the Institute, the National Institute of Public Service on the 31st of May, there will be a sharing of experience amongst associations who were granted two tenders regarding the bridge to be built between associations and companies to mobilize goodwill and skills. I know I'm being a little bit lengthy, but don't hesitate to stop me. Regarding consultation and consultation, CNDSC, so the National Council of Development and International Solidarity, has played a very important role. I referred to the report they wrote regarding a favorable environment, and this council, CNDC, is now contributing to the drafting of youth policy. And so it's the interaction amongst the members from these various groups that we have been able to put this in place, because we encourage the production of knowledge stemming from CSOs. And to conclude, regarding engagement, citizen engagement and mobilization of youth, we cannot ignore the importance of this topic. If we want to have a robust civil society, and if we want to have youth who are engaged and citizens who are engaged, it is extremely important to have programs regarding education to citizenship and international solidarity. The program has mobilized 15 million euros per year on average, and it raises awareness amongst citizens to what is important at on the world stage regarding the Declaration of Dublin for the education to citizenship, world citizenship. And so at the Horizon 2050, we want to mobilize the public authorities, the youth organizations, and the European institutions to the importance of reaching these goals. These were the comments I wanted to make. I know it's a whole retinue of little comments and observations after listening to what you said this afternoon. So by way of conclusion, I would simply say that we are convinced of the importance of the contribution that CSOs bring to democracy. And as Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs, we give a lot of importance to this, a growing importance, because this is important for the construction of public policies in link with experts, of course. And as I was saying in my introductory part, I said it's important to mobilize as many academic resources on the subject. This is essential, and would be happy to relay the recommendations that have been made within the European Unions and to all the appropriate fora, so that these recommendations will be heard and put in place. And we would be delighted to be to relay your message. Thanks again for your attention. And I was really happy to be part of the discussion.
Thank you very much, Charlotte Dommartin, for this closing speech. We've nearly reached the end of the webinar. Florian is just going to conclude with a few words. So this is my opportunity to thank everyone for your participation today, attendees and also speakers. So thank you very much. And Florian, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Claire. I'm keeping you for another 3 minutes. We are now coming to the end of our webinar. I would like to thank a lot all the speakers and our partners, the Mecenat Institute, the Institute for Social Research, and Le Mouvement Associatif, who help us shed light on all those important topics. I would also like to thank again the French Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs and the European Commission for their support to our work. Eventually, I would like to thank the Institute's team, Claire Bréchard, for the preparation and moderation of this webinar, and Clara Grange for her support in organizing the event. We will send you in the next few days an email with the white paper and the link to the online library. And at the same time, you will receive a satisfaction survey. Thank you in advance for your answers, which will help us improve our future events. Since the beginning of our works, and today while listening to our speakers, I've been struck by the pressing need to think about CSO's place alongside public policies with regard to taking care of the general interest and transforming society. I've also been struck by how fragile knowledge is to address this need. And because crises are multiplying, war, climate crisis, financial and health crisis, we have to accelerate the awareness about the role of CSOs in overcoming societal problems. We have to strengthen advocacy and strategic visions within the CSO sector, we also have to foster a wider consideration of CSOs in public policies. The French Institute of Civil Society Organization intends to play a role in this movement by carrying out a knowledge program on CSOs at the European level. We know that this is a very high ambition and we are aware of the obstacle. We know that the knowledge built on the long term and it is often not seen as a priority by CSOs and their partners because they have to handle more and more urgent needs. We also know that bridge still needs to be established or developed between academia and practitioners. That bridge must also be strengthened between countries, both on the side of researchers and CSOs. And finally, we know that research still lacks support, particularly financial support. However, the obstacles to be overcome and the means to overcome them have been identified. Raising awareness on our issues, structuring a European knowledge network, federating partners, and these are the next steps that we will be working on over the next years. And because it is a very high ambition, we want this work to be based on collective engagement, on networking, and on partnerships and alliances. You were 375 people that have registered to attend to this webinar. Your important mobilization today, as well as the great mobilization in our working group, makes us very optimistic. And I would like to conclude by this call to you to continue our work together. We'll need you in the coming months to support and help this network grow so that we can build a European knowledge program. And if you are a researcher or a practitioner and you want to join this knowledge network, or if you are a public funder or a private foundation and you want to join our program, then please contact us. You will find our mail address in the chat box, and you will soon receive a mail from us. Thank you all for your participation, and see you very soon.